that Russia is stopping its participation in the treaty about strategic offensive weapons. It does not. We do not withdraw from the treaty, but we are putting it on hold.
Okay. That's Vladimir Putin today withdrawing from something called the START Treaty. It was an Obama-era treaty between us and Russia about nuclear weapons. This all pertains to nuclear weapons. So that's what Russia's leader is saying. Our leader, such as it is, out there saying this.
And let there be no doubt, the commitment of the United States to our NATO alliance and Article 5 is rock solid. And every member of NATO knows it, and Russia knows it as well. An attack against one is an attack against all. It's a sacred oath. Sacred oath to defend every inch of NATO territory.
Ukraine isn't part of NATO. They're not part of NATO. But you know what? Let's set all that aside for a moment. Because we'll get to China and everything else here in a moment. There is a question out there that's been on my mind. It's just hanging on my mind. I can't get it off my mind. I actually woke up this morning thinking about this question as it pertains to Russia, Ukraine, and us and the world. One big question, and a question that somebody needs to answer. In fact, the answer to this question really should determine everything from here on out. And the question is simply this. Vladimir Putin. I'm not a fan. I don't know him, don't like him. But Vladimir Putin. Okay, the world has stacked up against Vladimir Putin for his actions in Ukraine. Now, I get all that. I get Putin invaded Ukraine. The world is stacked up against him. I understand it. You understand it. We all get it. We all get who the players are here. The world wants him out. And you're fond, well, you're probably not fond of, but you hear a lot of this. Get him out. Must be defeated at any cost. Nothing for Putin. He must go back to Russia in disgrace. And all these things that sound good, sounds tough. American politicians and political pundits love to get up and say that kind of stuff. We won't give an inch, as if he's out there on the front lines putting rounds downrange. But beyond that, the question is, will Vladimir Putin, is there any scenario at all that will cause Vladimir Putin to pack up his toys and go home, to accept a total loss? He gets nothing. No territory, no concessions, no nothing. All he gets is disgrace in a loss. Is there a way that happens? That is the only question that matters. Because if the answer to that question is yes, okay, then let's figure out how do we make him pack up his toys and go home. However, if the answer to that question is no, well, we need to change some tactics here. And we need to adjust some things here. Did you happen to hear the latest from the NATO chief?
We are also increasingly concerned that China may be planning to provide lethal support for Russia's war. Putin must not win.
Okay. China might start working with Russia to provide lethal aid. I know nobody talks about this, certainly nobody right now talking about Ukraine at all costs, but Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela have done joint military exercises recently. Look, the world is imperfect. The world is ugly. I don't like seeing bombed out apartment buildings, people losing everything in Ukraine. It's horrible. Look, it's all awful. I understand that. I get it. But we're not dealing with your feels or my feels. Let's set emotions aside here for a moment. If Putin won't accept the total loss, yet we are going to send tanks and missiles and everything else with the intention of giving him a total loss, and China is finding itself aligned with Putin, that's two major nuclear powers on the planet who've decided to dig in their heels and say no. Well, I think it's time for you and I to acknowledge something that we don't want to acknowledge. And this is just the reality of it. You've lived your entire life feeling safe from attacks from foreign powers. So have I. It's part of the reason things like Pearl Harbor or 9/11 feel so real to us to this day. You get a visceral reaction when you bring up 9/11 to this day. I do too. Why? We were attacked here. Somebody came here and attacked us in our home. And we as Americans are used to having this wonderful country and wonderful oceans, two of them, Atlantic and Pacific, nice little buffer there, wonderful Navy, wonderful Air Force. We're used to feeling safe from foreign adversaries. But you and I have got to acknowledge something, and we've got to acknowledge it right now. We're not safe from China and Russia here. Oh, I'm not saying they're superior to us. I'm not saying that in any way. I'm not even saying they're superior militarily. We are not dealing with some goat herders in Afghanistan here. We are dealing with powers who can touch you specifically, me specifically, my power gone, my train derailed. We are dealing with foreign powers who have the ability to strike us here at home and hurt us badly. So again, I want to circle back to my question for the third time. I don't know how to take the measure of the man. I know that that's the most important thing in the world. What is the measure of Vladimir Putin? Is there any scenario where he will go home and accept a total loss? And again, if the answer to that question is no, then we have got to change something quickly before we start getting touched here at home. Oh, and did I mention, while China and Russia are forming a military coalition against us and against us, the President of the United States of America can't even answer a simple no to the question when he's asked if he personally is compromised by one of those two big powers.
Compromised by your family's business relations.
Sir, Mr. President, there is
give me a break, man. Don't come to my office and ask the question when they have more polite people.
Give me a break, man. That's not an answer, Mr. President. Your son has documented dirty ties to the Communist Party of China. How owned are you? Because you have documented dirty ties to your son in his business dealings. How owned are you by one of the two nuclear powers we're currently making angry on the world stage? That's a legitimate question to ask. And how am I supposed to take it when reports come out that we haven't heard sirens, air raid sirens in Ukraine for days and days and days? And did you know this? Because they don't want to start World War III either, Russia agreed to a ceasefire while Joe Biden was on the ground. So already the air raid sirens have not been going off. Russia has agreed, hey, we're not going to start lobbing artillery shells your way. Don't want to accidentally kill the U.S. president. But the U.S. president goes to visit Ukraine, and instead we get some theater performance clearly organized between the Biden administration and the Ukrainian government to act like he was in danger from the air raids.
I've been here for the past 5 days. I have not heard any explosions. I have not heard any air sirens until about half an hour ago, right when President Biden was in the center of Kyiv.
Oops. I'm starting to feel a little manipulated here. Are you? And the problem is, this isn't some standard domestic political game where they play these games with us and propaganda and they lie, and in the end, we're just a little less free and the money goes, a little bit less far. No, now we're dealing with big boy politics. Now we're dealing with World War III. These little manipulation games by America's communists, they have consequences beyond, I think, what you and I want to sit down and talk about. Oh, and do keep in mind, if that World War III kicks off, this is the human being who's going to be commanding America's armies.
We built a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific, NATO in the Atlantic, Japan in the Pacific. I mean, across the world.
All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right.